Kim, what's on your radar?
Well, good news for millions of Americans. Biden's vaccine mandate for private companies has been officially halted. The mandate required businesses with over 100 employees to either require everyone be vaccinated or tested weekly and wear masks. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals put an emergency temporary hold on the vaccine mandate until they could fully look it over. Then within days, the court issued a scathing 22-page opinion reading Biden's mandate, the Riot Act, and ordered the federal government to stop enforcement. The court said the mandate was fatally flawed constitutionally for a number of reasons. First, the administration openly admitted it was looking for a workaround to force Americans into the vaccine and just ended up landing on OSHA, but would have used any vehicle they could find. The court wondered what makes a company with 100 employees so much more hazardous than a company with 99, since this mandate only applies to companies with 100 employees or more. Also, if this is such an emergency, why was Biden waiting 90 days to begin the mandate? Quote, the mandate is staggeringly overbroad, applying to 2 out of 3 private sector employees in America. In workplaces as diverse as the country itself, the mandate fails to consider what is perhaps the most salient fact of all. The ongoing threat of COVID-19 is more dangerous to some employees than to other employees. All else equal, a 28-year-old trucker spending the bulk of his workday in the solitude of his cab is simply less vulnerable to COVID-19 than a 62-year-old prison janitor. Likewise, a naturally immune unvaccinated worker is presumably at less risk than an unvaccinated worker who has never had the virus. The list goes on. But one constant remains. The mandate fails almost completely to address or even respond to much of this reality and common sense. Now, I agree with them, but a lot of this, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be common sense for many these days. Now, as a result, OSHA has now announced it is suspending the mandate for private companies pending future developments in the litigation, if there ever are any. Now, though the mandates have been halted for private companies, there are still mandates in effect for federal employees and contractors, military and healthcare workers. And there are numerous lawsuits challenging each one of these, so we'll keep you posted if there are any developments. Now, the entire point of the mandates is to stop or slow the spread of COVID, not just Biden's worker mandates, but also the mandate to attend events, schools, to travel, or even to just go out to bars and restaurants in some cities. The government, media, and Fauci have told us we all need to be vaccinated in order to end the pandemic. It's so important that the government is telling us to get the jab or lose our jobs. It's so important that the government is requiring us to be vaccinated in order to roam freely and enjoy our lives. So many Americans did it. But let's take a look at some recent headlines. The definition of fully vaccinated is changing to 3 COVID-19 doses. Are you fully vaccinated? Did you do it so you could just live your life freely? Well, you might need another dose to gain access to that bar you love. Now that booster doses are being required in places like the UK and Israel in order to be considered fully vaccinated, many are wondering if a mandatory 3rd shot or 2nd shot of Johnson & Johnson will be required here in the U.S. as well. As of right now, in the U.S., the booster dose is recommended, not required. But as soon as the FDA and CDC give the green light for everyone to get the booster, this very well could change, especially with headlines like these. 8 dead, 89 infected after COVID outbreak at Connecticut nursing home. Greer Village Senior Community has 70 residents. 67 of them, as well as 22 staffers, have caught COVID in the past month and a half. And every single one of them, except for 2, were fully vaccinated. This isn't a unique story. In fact, this is exactly what health officials in Israel were warning us about. These vaccines wear off quickly. They're unlike any other vaccines we've ever been required to take. Other vaccines, like polio and measles, which are required to attend school, give you immunity. The smallpox vaccine, which was mandated in certain cities, gave a person immunity. Once you get the vaccine, you can't get the virus. You're safe. Simple as that. Sure, there's maybe a few breakthrough cases, but they genuinely are rare, very rare. We don't hear about millions of people breaking out with measles or polio after being vaccinated. Now it's possible that a 3rd dose will do it. A 3rd dose might just be the magic bullet. It's still a little too early to tell, but take a look at this headline. Christmas canceled in world's most vaxxed place after exponential rise in COVID cases. Now, Gibraltar has vaccinated 100% of its population with 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine and have given the majority of their adults a booster dose as well. They are the most vaccinated country on earth after rapidly deploying mass vaccinations beginning back in February. Yet, with much of its population triple jabbed and everybody double jabbed, they are currently experiencing a larger outbreak than they've seen since before they rolled out a single shot. The virus is moving so fast, they've decided to cancel all large Christmas celebrations. Not ideal. Now, if more and more people in the U.S. are pushed into the initial 2-dose vaccine and everyone else into a 3rd booster and parents into giving it to their ultra-low-risk children, and we still see no benefit like in Gibraltar, our public health officials, politicians, and media will have done irreparable harm to the trust given to them by the American people. And that is, I think, the biggest fear in all of this, in looking at this. From my opinion, I think we're eventually going to get to a point where we realize the vaccine is not the path to ending the pandemic. It's a great tool for keeping people safe for a period of time, to buy us some time, to potentially get us, treatments. I know Pfizer's coming out with their pill that'll hopefully save some lives, and we'll kind of get to this point. But as more Americans are feeling coerced, not able to live their lives, losing their jobs from the lockdowns, all of these ramifications from this. And if it ends up that nothing worked and we just followed the leader, I don't know if people will trust the leader anymore after this. And that is, I don't know what happens when there's another pandemic in the future.
Well, it would certainly be, if we can't, if being vaccinated, and you're right, it doesn't mean that, you can't get or transmit the virus. It actually makes it more important, and we are still dropping the ball on this to this day with the testing. The FDA still has not approved lots of tests that could be helping people. It's hard to get a test here. It's not hard to get a test in Europe because of what our government has done. So that would, if we need to rely on something else, that could be something else. But we've completely screwed that up, just so beyond hope.
One of my big concerns with this pandemic right now, in kind of regarding to the testing, is yes, we definitely need testing made available so people can feel like they're comfortable enough to go next to, near their vulnerable family members. But part of the problem with this pandemic is we're so focused on the case numbers, and it really should be hospitalizations and deaths. Places like Gibraltar, places like the UK that are seeing spikes in cases are not necessarily seeing the spikes in hospitalizations. So it's kind of like, why are you caring so much about the case numbers? Okay, fine, it's spreading around, but if people aren't dying, if they're not ending up in the hospitals or ICU, then maybe we should just say, it's kind of time to live with the virus, but we want to live with it, right? That's what our goal should be. So this hyper focus on cases, got to get rid of the cases, got to get rid of all this transmission. I don't know if that's the way out of this. I mean, what do you think, Ryan?
I mean, yes and no. If you don't get the case numbers down, then you're not going to get. It's going to be hard to get the death number down. Like more than 1,000 people a day are still dying of COVID. So if we just said, we're at a static place, let's just live with this. That math is actually pretty easy. 365,000 people dying, every single year. Obviously, it's going to move around a lot. Watching case numbers tick back up now, up almost 25% over the last 2-week average, is disheartening. And so, buying time, like you said, until we can get to a place where maybe the therapies are ready, maybe there are other types of vaccines that people are more willing to take, could matter. In other words, if people get boosters now, and that can take the death rate down from 1,000 down to 500 a day through the winter. And in the spring, there's a therapy that is 90% effective. All of those people then that survived the spring survived long enough to get to a place where there are medicines available. I'm actually, I got the Johnson & Johnson very early. I'm actually getting a booster today. I didn't really want to get it. I was hoping to hold out, but the holidays are coming. And the last thing I want to do is pick up an infection that I would, I suspect very easily beat, but pass that infection on to my mother, to my great aunt, to my mother's boyfriend, to anybody who's in a much riskier situation. And so if I can reduce that by getting a booster, then I think it's a sacrifice I've got to make.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I get it.
I'd rather not. I mean, just from my own
Right.
personal, but I feel like it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't think they really reduce transmission, but I think that is yet to be seen a little bit more, I suppose. And in the end of the day, I really worry more about if we continue down these lines. Public health officials keep pushing things, and then they end up not being the case, which we've seen with masking, we've seen with a lot of other lockdowns. People are already losing public trust. I wonder where this is going to lead us in the future. Public trust is already eroding, I think, in government in general, and I think this might make it a lot worse.
In D.C., many of our city council members signed a letter calling on Muriel Bowser to extend the mask mandate because think of the children. What about, my 3-year-old in a grocery store who isn't vaccinated yet? Very little risk to your 3-year-old in a grocery store, but I digress. Kim, thank you. We will have more Rising right after this.